Welcome to the channel. It is the summer of 1936, and Hercule Poirot, accompanied by his ever-loyal friend, Captain Hastings, arrives at the elegant Grand Wisteria House, a place draped in beauty and anticipation. Today should mark a joyous wedding beneath the sweep of purple blossoms, yet beneath the laughter and the scent of wisteria lies something darker, a whisper of secrets, a shadow waiting to be revealed. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Tell me in the comments below. It's always a pleasure to discover fellow mystery lovers from every corner of the globe. So, pour yourself a warm cup of coffee, settle into your favorite chair, and prepare to step into the intrigue that unfolds in the mystery at Wisteria House. Chapter 1. The Wedding Invitation. The strange affair that would come to haunt the summer of 1936 began in the most unremarkable of ways, with a wedding invitation. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, nestled among the usual post, elegant and understated, its heavy cream card and embossed lettering exuding refinement. At first glance, there was nothing extraordinary about it. Yet that simple piece of stationery would soon draw Hercule Poirot and me into one of the most intricate and unsettling cases of our acquaintance. The invitation bore the name of Miss Helena Mallory, announcing her forthcoming marriage to Mr. Richard Thornton. To most, it would have signaled nothing more than another society union. But to me, it carried the faint echo of familiarity and intrigue. The Mallorys were an old Hampshire family I had come to know during my military years, solid people of good breeding, though not without their peculiarities. Sir James Mallory, Helena's father, was a self-made magnate who had earned his fortune through railways and manufacturing. His success had purchased Wisteria House, a Georgian estate that had, over time, come to symbolize both prosperity and social ascent. As I examined the card, its fine engraving and perfectly balanced typography, I found myself wondering why I had been invited. Years had passed since I last saw Helena. I remembered her as striking, dark-haired, poised, and with a mind that seemed far sharper than the drawing-room chatter to which she was often subjected. There was something behind her eyes, a reserve tinged with curiosity, as if she observed rather than merely participated in the world around her. My musings were interrupted by the unmistakable voice of Hercule Poirot. "A wedding, mon ami?" he inquired, emerging from his room immaculate as ever, his tie precisely centered, his moustache gleaming like a badge of authority. I handed him the card, and he examined it not as one reads an invitation, but as one studies evidence, his fingertips testing the texture, his eyes noting the typeface, even the pressure of the pen that had addressed the envelope. "Ah," he murmured at last, "the Mallorys of Hampshire. I remember you once spoke of them, the father with the fortune in railways, and the daughter with the striking eyes, yes?" I smiled at his recollection. Exactly so, though I must admit I hadn't expected to hear from them again. "It seems Miss Helena is to marry a barrister named Richard Thornton. His name rings a bell, though I can't place it." Poirot tilted his head thoughtfully. "A barrister with a familiar name often suggests one whose work is, how shall I say, not entirely confined to the courtroom. Perhaps he is a man with connections, yes?" I laughed. "You make it sound like a criminal conspiracy, Poirot. By all accounts, Thornton is well regarded. His firm handles international trade, South American business mostly, Argentina, Brazil, that sort of thing." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And the wedding, it is to be held at the family home, Wisteria House?" "Yes," I replied. "The place is quite beautiful. Georgian architecture, fine gardens, and the wisteria itself, legendary in June. The entire south wall is blanketed in purple bloom." He nodded slowly, as though committing the details to some invisible mental ledger. You see, Hastings, a wedding is a most curious event. It is one of the few occasions when every emotion of the human heart is laid bare: love, envy, ambition, pride. Even the most polished guests cannot entirely conceal themselves beneath smiles and champagne. It is an excellent place to study the soul. I laughed again, though something in his tone gave me pause. You sound as though you're planning to conduct an investigation rather than attend a celebration. Perhaps both, he said softly, returning the invitation to me. After all, one never knows what truth may hide beneath the petals of wisteria. By that afternoon, I had penned our acceptance. The thought of returning to Hampshire in the height of summer was, I confess, appealing. London had grown stiflingly dull, and the promise of a country wedding seemed the perfect escape. Yet as I sealed the envelope, a faint unease tugged at me. I recalled overhearing something at my club, a casual remark that Richard Thornton had once been involved in a legal affair of some delicacy, one that brushed uncomfortably close to scandal. Still, I dismissed the thought as idle gossip. The prospect of Helena's happiness, of seeing the grand old house draped in blossoms, far outweighed any lingering misgivings. Little did I suspect that beneath the gentle fragrance of wisteria, darker motives were already taking root, and that this seemingly innocent invitation would soon draw us into a mystery that would test every ounce of Poirot's formidable brilliance. Chapter 2. Arrivals and First Impressions. The journey to Hampshire was as picturesque as any English summer could offer. The countryside, bathed in mellow sunlight, rolled past our carriage window in a patchwork of gold and green, each field framed by hedgerows and blooming meadows sweet. Seated beside me, Hercule Poirot regarded the passing scenery with that same intense scrutiny he reserved for human nature. To him, even a landscape was a reflection of national character, every stone cottage, every orderly garden, a silent testimony to the English love for permanence, propriety, and tradition. "Observe, Hastings," he said at last, as the train slowed near our stop. "These houses, they are not built merely to live in. They are built to proclaim, 'Here stands respectability.'" He gestured lightly toward the cluster of gabled roofs beyond the station. "It is, how you say, the architecture of self-assurance." As our motor car carried us through the lanes toward Wisteria House, I found myself quietly agreeing with his sentiment. The villages of Hampshire exuded a serenity untouched by time. Ivy-clad walls, ancient oaks, and gardens arranged with the meticulous grace of a well-ordered mind. Yet beyond their beauty, there was something else, a subtle sense of concealment, as though beneath each thatched roof lay secrets politely buried under generations of civility. Wisteria House appeared at last, rising in perfect Georgian symmetry amid sweeping lawns. Its honeyed stone facade glowed warmly in the late afternoon sun, while cascades of violet wisteria spilled down the southern wall in a breathtaking display. The air was heavy with its fragrance. Even Poirot, who seldom surrendered to sentiment, regarded it with admiration. "Mon cher Hastings," he murmured, "one understands immediately why men may covet such a place, and why others perhaps may destroy for it." We were greeted at the entrance by Sir James Mallory himself, the patriarch of the family. Though advanced in years, he retained the vigor of a man who had carved his success from determination and calculation. His handshake was firm, his welcome genuine. "Captain Hastings, it's been far too long," he exclaimed, his northern accent softened but not lost to years of social polish. "And this must be the celebrated Monsieur Poirot. An honor to have you at Wisteria House." Lady Mallory, poised and gracious, joined us with the quiet command of a woman long accustomed to managing both household and guests. There was elegance in every detail she oversaw: the arrangement of fresh blooms in the hallway, the symmetry of the tea service, even the delicate embroidery on the table linen. The Mallorys, it was clear, prided themselves on refinement, but it was Helena who drew every eye as we assembled for tea on the terrace. Time had only enhanced her beauty. Her dark hair gleamed beneath the sun, her poise effortless yet somehow strained, as though her composure was a veil stretched over restless thoughts. "Captain Hastings," she greeted me warmly, extending a hand. "I'm touched you made the journey. I half wondered whether you'd forgotten us." "Forgotten you? Impossible," I replied, smiling. "And may I present my friend, Monsieur Hercule Poirot?" Poirot bowed slightly, his eyes appraising yet courteous. "Mademoiselle, your beauty, it is spoken of, but the truth, it surpasses even the legend." She laughed, a sound both graceful and uncertain. "You flatter me, Monsieur Poirot, though I suspect you see far more than you say." The afternoon passed in leisurely conversation, though I could not help but notice a faint tension beneath the surface, fleeting glances, pauses that lingered too long. The bridegroom, Richard Thornton, was a well-groomed man of 32, intelligent and composed, with the easy assurance of one accustomed to success. Helena introduced him proudly. "Richard has been making quite the reputation for himself in London. He specializes in commercial law, trade with South America, isn't it, my dear?" "Indeed," Thornton replied with modest ease. "A challenging field, but one that keeps life interesting." His words were smooth, his smile confident. Yet there was a moment when mention was made of certain foreign investments that his expression flickered, a subtle shadow that passed too quickly to be certain of. Poirot, of course, noticed. He always did. The gathering included a mixture of local gentry and London professionals, a blend that produced both charm and friction. Among the guests, none stood out more than Gerald Fenton, Thornton's best man. A tall, jovial fellow with a ready laugh, he moved effortlessly between groups, bridging the divide between town and country. "Capital chap, Fenton," Thornton remarked approvingly. "We were at Oxford together. He's done rather well for himself. Business interests abroad, you know. South America mostly." The evening ended with an informal concert in the drawing room. Helena played the pianoforte with grace, though her eyes seemed elsewhere, lost in thoughts far from music. Poirot sat in silence, observing her intently. "A curious woman, Hastings," he murmured afterward. "She smiles, yet within her heart there is une petite dissonance, a note that is not quite in tune." Later that night, as I retired to my chamber, I found it difficult to shake a lingering unease. Everything about Wisteria House was perfect. Too perfect, perhaps. The hospitality, the elegance, the laughter, all seemed carefully arranged, as if to conceal something fragile beneath. And though I could not have said why, I had the distinct sense that beneath the fragrance of the wisteria, something darker waited to bloom. Chapter 3. The Unwelcome Guest. The second morning at Wisteria House dawned in a blaze of golden light, the kind that seems to promise serenity. From my window, the grounds unfolded in quiet perfection, velvety lawns sloping toward the distant woodland, flower beds alive with bees and butterflies, and the elegant shimmer of dew still clinging to the grass. It was a view that invited calm reflection, and for a fleeting moment I forgot entirely that beneath this tranquil beauty, human affairs could be far less orderly. Poirot, ever the model of discipline, had already finished his morning routine when I descended to the breakfast room. There he sat, immaculate as always, his napkin precisely folded, his moustaches gleaming in the morning light. Before him lay an array of letters, which he examined with the grave attention of a man reviewing evidence rather than correspondence. "Observe, Hastings," he said, delicately buttering a slice of toast. "This household, it is a masterpiece of order, every movement rehearsed, every plate in its place. Such precision is admirable, and, perhaps, a little revealing. Where there is perfection, mon ami, there is often anxiety." He was right, of course. Lady Mallory's household ran like a well-tuned clock. Servants moved noiselessly, breakfast was served with elegant restraint, and even the arrangement of fruit seemed the result of careful deliberation. Yet, as I watched Helena Mallory enter the room a few moments later, I sensed a faint discord beneath the harmony. She looked radiant in a soft yellow morning gown that captured the sunlight as she crossed to the table. But beneath her graceful demeanor was an unmistakable restlessness, a tremor in her hands, a quickness in her step, a gaze that flitted too often toward the terrace. "I trust you both slept soundly?" she asked, her voice light, but her mind clearly elsewhere. "Exceptionally well," I replied. "Your gardens, Miss Mallory, are the very picture of English charm." "Father is quite proud of them," she said, her tone distracted. "He always insists that a house is not complete without the landscape to frame it. Each tree, each path must be part of the whole." Her eyes, however, remained fixed on the driveway beyond the window, as though anticipating something or someone. That someone appeared shortly before 11. A motor car, modest but well kept, drew up before the entrance, and from it emerged a stout gentleman of middle years. His expression bore that curious mixture of self-importance and weariness peculiar to men accustomed to negotiation rather than leisure. There was nothing in his dress to distinguish him, yet his presence seemed immediately out of place among the quiet refinement of Wisteria House. Helena's reaction was instantaneous. The color drained from her cheeks, and she set down her cup with a faint clatter. Across the table, Gerald Fenton, usually the embodiment of good humor, froze mid-conversation. His ruddy face blanched, and he muttered under his breath, "Good heavens, Bristow. What on earth is he doing here?" "Bristow," repeated Richard Thornton, Helena's fiancé, his lawyer's composure intact but his tone cautious. "Arthur Bristow," Gerald explained reluctantly. "An old business associate from my ventures abroad. Persistent fellow, too persistent." Helena rose abruptly. "If you'll excuse me," she said, her voice low but tight with strain. She moved quickly to the terrace, where moments later her voice could be heard greeting the unexpected visitor. The man's reply carried easily through the open doors. "Miss Mallory, you look splendid. Marriage clearly agrees with you, even before it's official. I must admit, I was surprised not to receive an invitation to such a grand affair." Helena's voice, though controlled, trembled faintly at the edges. "Mr. Bristow, your arrival is unexpected. Surely you realize this is a private family gathering." Bristow chuckled, a coarse sound that grated against the refined air of the house. Now, my dear. Old friends shouldn't stand on ceremony, especially when there are shared interests involved." His eyes flicked toward the window where Gerald stood rigidly, his discomfort now impossible to conceal. At that moment, Richard Thornton stepped out onto the terrace, his face composed but his posture defensive. "Mr. Bristow, I believe you may be mistaken. This is a private event. No invitation was extended." Bristow inclined his head mockingly. "Quite right. None was extended. But when one hears of the marriage of former partners, particularly those with mutual investments across the Atlantic, one feels compelled to pay one's respects." His words carried an edge that made everyone uneasy. Even Poirot, who had thus far observed silently, tilted his head ever so slightly, his sharp eyes narrowing with interest. Helena's composure began to falter. "You will please excuse us, Mr. Bristow," she said firmly. "This is neither the time nor the place to discuss business." "Oh, but my dear Miss Mallory," Bristow replied, his smile as false as polished brass. "Business has a way of following one, doesn't it? Especially when certain arrangements remain unresolved. I believe Mr. Thornton understands what I mean." A silence followed, taut and heavy. Richard's expression darkened, and Gerald's hand tightened around his glass until his knuckles whitened. The onlookers could sense it, the ghost of a scandal rising unbidden to the surface. "I think it best if you leave," Helena said at last, her voice firm with quiet authority. "Your presence here serves no purpose other than to distress my family." For a moment, it seemed Bristow might obey. Then his smile returned, sly, knowing, almost triumphant. "Oh, I wouldn't dream of leaving just yet. Weddings are such revealing occasions, and I suspect this one will be no exception." His words hung in the air like a chill breeze cutting through summer warmth. Lady Mallory, with impeccable courtesy that scarcely concealed her dismay, ordered a guest room prepared for him. Refusing a visitor, however uninvited, would have been unthinkable to her sense of propriety. As the servants led Bristow away, the assembled company dispersed, their cheerful chatter replaced by uneasy whispers. Poirot, watching the retreating figure of their unwelcome guest, leaned toward me with a faint smile. "You see, Hastings, the past, it is like a seed buried beneath the soil. You may forget it, but one day it sprouts, pushing through the prettiest of gardens." That afternoon, though laughter resumed and preparations for the wedding continued, the atmosphere at Wisteria House had altered irrevocably. The light seemed less golden, the wistaria's scent faintly oppressive. Beneath the surface civility, a sense of unease had taken root, the kind that only deepens as the truth edges nearer to revelation. Chapter 4. The Wedding Day. The morning of the wedding broke clear and bright, as though the heavens themselves had decided to bless the union taking place at Wisteria House. The previous evening's rain had washed the gardens to a fresh brilliance. The lawns gleamed with dew, and the air carried the faint sweetness of wisteria still heavy upon the walls. Yet for all its loveliness, the day began under a quiet tension, the sort that lingers when secrets hover just out of sight. To honor tradition, the male guests were invited to take part in a morning hunt across the estate's wide grounds. I confess I looked forward to it. There was something invigorating about the prospect. The rhythm of hooves across open fields, the crisp summer air in the lungs, and the illusion, at least for a time, that the world beyond consisted only of nature and camaraderie. Poirot, of course, declined the invitation. "To pursue the poor fox, mon ami," he said, arching an eyebrow. "No. I prefer to hunt the far more elusive creature, human motive. The stable yard may show one kind of sport, but the drawing room, that is where true revelations occur." He was right, as always, though I was far too fond of riding to give up the chance. Shortly after 8, a dozen or so gentlemen assembled, all immaculate in their morning coats and riding boots, though their enthusiasm varied. Richard Thornton, the groom-to-be, was the picture of calm courtesy, ensuring every guest was well mounted and comfortable, even as the strain of the day ahead showed faintly in his eyes. Gerald Fenton, ever the jovial sportsman, offered cheerful advice on terrain and horses. "Perfect weather for a gallop," he declared, patting his horse's neck. "Sir James keeps the boundaries as though the hunt were an art form." Among us, however, was one figure who did not quite belong: Arthur Bristow. His presence, like a stone dropped into still water, sent ripples through the group. His riding was competent, though without grace, and his attire, while proper enough, somehow lacked the easy distinction of those accustomed to such pastimes. Conversation around him seemed to falter. Even his attempts at genial small talk were met with restrained politeness. "Nothing like a brisk ride to whet the appetite for nuptials," he said to no one in particular. No one replied. The morning unfolded pleasantly enough at first. We crossed hedgerows and open meadows, the thunder of hooves echoing like drums of celebration. Yet I couldn't shake the sense that the day's harmony was brittle. Gerald, I noticed, was unusually preoccupied with his riding boots, checking them with near-obsessive care before mounting, as though his mind were elsewhere entirely. Around mid-morning, the weather shifted with typical English mischief. Clouds gathered almost imperceptibly at first, then thickened with alarming speed. What began as a fine mist became a determined drizzle, and before long, a proper downpour. The sky darkened, and the trail through the lower meadows turned into a patchwork of slippery mud and puddles. Richard called the hunt to an early halt. "We'd best return before anyone takes a tumble," he said. "A broken collarbone would be an ill omen on one's wedding day." We laughed, but our amusement was short-lived. By the time we reached the stables, we were a sight to behold, soaked to the skin, mud-spattered, and utterly unsuited to polite company. "Gentlemen," Sir James Mallory remarked dryly as he surveyed our bedraggled appearance, "I suggest you make haste with your baths. The ceremony commences in 1 hour, and I dare say our current condition would scandalize the vicar." What followed could only be described as a domestic whirlwind. Servants darted through the corridors carrying towels, hot water, and pressed suits. Guests scrambled to shed wet garments and restore their dignity before the bells began to ring. When I finally reached my chamber, dripping and slightly out of breath, I found Poirot seated comfortably by the window, engrossed in a thick volume titled The History of Hampshire Estates. He glanced up, his eyes twinkling. "Ah, Hastings. You return from your sporting adventure looking most authentic. Tell me, do the English always prepare for sacred matrimony by rolling in the mud?" "Not intentionally," I said, attempting to remove a stubborn streak from my sleeve. He chuckled softly. "It is most instructive, mon ami. One moment, the country gentleman, the next, the polished guest of society. Such transformations, they reveal more about character than the hunt itself." When the ceremony finally began, the scene was one of serene perfection. The small village church, garlanded with white roses and wisteria, seemed lifted from the pages of a pastoral painting. Helena Mallory, radiant in her gown of ivory silk and antique lace, moved down the aisle like a vision from another age. Richard waited at the altar, composed and dignified, though a faint pallor betrayed the depth of his emotions. The vicar, an elderly man who had known the family since childhood, conducted the service with measured grace. Even Arthur Bristow, positioned discreetly near the back, managed a facade of respectability. His expression betrayed little, neither approval nor mischief, but his eyes, sharp and restless, missed nothing. Afterwards, Wisteria House came alive with celebration. The drawing rooms glittered with crystal and laughter. Champagne flowed as freely as conversation. From the terrace one could see the valley stretching green and endless beneath a clearing sky. Lady Mallory, every inch the gracious hostess, ensured that no detail was amiss. From the placement of the musicians to the perfect alignment of the silver tea service. Guests mingled easily, though here and there, subtle currents of tension remained. Bristow drifted through the crowd like an unwelcome echo, his attempts at conversation met with cool civility. Gerald, noticeably uneasy, kept his distance, but could not hide the flickers of guilt that seemed to chase across his expression. Even as Helena and Richard smiled and danced, one sensed that beneath the gaiety, something unspoken stirred, the whisper of past entanglements that refused to stay buried. By the time the couple prepared to cut the wedding cake, the air inside the grand drawing room felt almost too bright, too perfect, as though the harmony of the day balanced on a fragile thread. Watching them, I could not help wondering how long such balance could last before the weight of hidden truths began to shift it. Chapter 5. Death in the Library. The joyous rhythm of the wedding day fractured with a swiftness that left all of us momentarily unmoored. Only minutes earlier, Wisteria House had been alive with laughter, the delicate clinking of champagne glasses, and the graceful murmur of guests exchanging pleasantries beneath the soft glow of afternoon sunlight. Then, as if a hidden curtain had suddenly fallen, that world of gaiety gave way to something cold and irrevocable, a shadow that would haunt the estate long after the last note of music faded. The reception had unfolded with almost perfect precision after the morning's rain and excitement. The sun had returned, gilding the terrace and the manicured gardens beyond. Helena and Richard, radiant as newlyweds should be, moved among their guests with smiles that seemed effortless, their happiness lending warmth to every conversation. It was during the traditional cutting of the wedding cake at precisely 3 o'clock that an absence first drew quiet attention. Arthur Bristow, whose presence had already strained the polite fabric of the day, was nowhere to be seen. Lady Mallory, ever the vigilant hostess, approached me with her trademark composure. "Captain Hastings," she said softly, "I do hope I might trouble you for a small favor. It appears Mr. Bristow has slipped away from the company. Would you be so kind as to check that he's comfortable? I'd hate for any guest to feel neglected." Her tone, though outwardly courteous, betrayed a note of relief, as though the man's disappearance was more blessing than inconvenience. Still, duty and curiosity compelled me to oblige. My search began in the usual haunts, the smoking room, the billiard chamber, even the smaller parlors where one might escape the noise of festivity. Each room, however, yielded nothing but silence. It was only when I turned toward the library, Sir James's most prized sanctuary, that an unaccountable unease began to stir within me. The heavy oak door creaked faintly as I entered, and the scent of leather-bound books and polished wood filled the air. At first glance, the scene seemed one of serene normalcy. A single chair by the tall, mullioned windows, a half-opened book on the table beside it, and a man seated in still repose. But as I stepped closer, the quiet took on a dreadful meaning. Arthur Bristow's head rested unnaturally against the chair's high back, his face pale, expression slack, and an ominous stain darkening the fabric near his temple. A revolver, a Webley, unmistakable from my service days, lay on the carpet at his side. For a moment, my mind refused to reconcile what I saw. Then instinct took over. I called for help. The alarm spread swiftly through the house, shattering what remained of the day's celebration. Sir James arrived first, his features hardening as the grim reality dawned upon him. Lady Mallory, though visibly shaken, wasted no time assuming command of the situation. "The police must be summoned immediately," Sir James ordered in a voice that allowed no debate. "No one is to disturb anything." Within the hour, Inspector Meadows of the County Constabulary appeared, a solid, practical man whose expression suggested he had seen much, but perhaps not this. His inspection was efficient and brisk, his conclusions delivered with premature confidence. "A suicide, I'd say," he announced. "Clear evidence, the weapon close at hand, a note, and the position of the body. It appears our man succumbed to his own despair." The letter, written in Bristow's cramped handwriting, painted a picture of ruin and hopelessness. It spoke of debts, failed ventures, and pressures no man could endure. Yet, as I read it over his shoulder, something in the composition troubled me. It was too composed, too deliberate. I had known men in despair. Their final words were rarely so carefully phrased. Helena's reaction was unexpected and deeply unsettling. She turned pale at the news, her hands trembling as she clutched Richard's arm. When Inspector Meadows approached her for questioning, her composure wavered. "Mrs. Thornton," he began courteously, "I understand you had prior acquaintance with the deceased." She hesitated, the pause barely perceptible. "Mr. Bristow was involved in certain business dealings with my late father," she replied, her tone measured. "I hadn't seen him for years, until yesterday." "Several guests noticed a rather heated discussion between you and Mr. Bristow yesterday morning," the inspector pressed. "Might I ask what that was about?" Color rose swiftly in her cheeks. "A misunderstanding," she said after a breath. "Mr. Bristow held mistaken notions regarding some old family matters. I merely corrected them." Her explanation, though plausible, carried the brittle edge of someone carefully controlling her words. Richard, for his part, remained steadfast at her side, calm, composed, and clearly aware of the potential legal implications of every statement. Through it all, Poirot had stood silently near the bookshelves, his sharp eyes moving from the revolver to the windows, to the note upon the desk. At last, he turned to me, his voice quiet but certain. "Mon ami, our good inspector is quick, perhaps too quick. The scene tells one story, but I suspect another lies hidden beneath its surface. Observe the details, the placement, the timing. There is art here, not despair." As evening descended upon Wisteria House, the echoes of music and laughter seemed like memories from another lifetime. The wedding that had begun with such grace and promise now ended under the shadow of suspicion and whispered speculation. Somewhere within that great house, among its shelves and silences, a secret lingered, one that would soon draw Hercule Poirot into a mystery as intricate as the heart of human deceit itself. Chapter 6. Under Suspicion. The morning after the tragedy at Wisteria House carried with it an air of suffocating heaviness. The laughter, music, and celebration that had filled the great rooms only a day before now seemed distant echoes of a happier world. Arthur Bristow's sudden death had not only ended the festivities, it had cast an invisible but unrelenting shadow over everyone who had been present. The mood was somber, the once bright halls subdued under the grey light that filtered through drawn curtains. Even the servants moved with cautious silence, as though fearing that sound itself might invite accusation. Inspector Meadows had established his command in Sir James's study, turning that once comfortable sanctuary of books into a chamber of questioning. From morning till noon, members of the wedding party were summoned one by one to endure his probing inquiries. His method was precise, if somewhat unimaginative, and his focus seemed to narrow more sharply with each passing hour upon one figure: Helena Thornton, the bride. Helena bore the ordeal with the calm poise expected of her upbringing. But beneath that graceful restraint there was something brittle, a tension that revealed itself only in the slightest tremor of her hand or the quickness of her breath between sentences. The inspector's questions had grown more pointed. "Mrs. Thornton," he began during one of their interviews, "our investigation suggests that Mr. Bristow possessed detailed knowledge of your family's financial affairs. Would you care to amend your earlier statement regarding your acquaintance with him?" Helena straightened, her tone composed but edged with fatigue. "Inspector, I have already spoken the truth. Mr. Bristow conducted certain business transactions with my late uncle's estate some years ago. His more recent claims of relevance to our family were entirely baseless. Her mention of her uncle, long deceased after an unfortunate business venture in Buenos Aires, introduced a new thread into the tangled skein of inquiry. The late gentleman, I later learned, had been involved in South American exports, and his affairs had ended in confusion and rumor. Even as she spoke with conviction, I could not ignore the faint unease in her eyes, a woman holding fast to control while the ground beneath her shifted. My years in the army had shown me many forms of courage, but few as quiet or as fragile as hers in that moment. Richard Thornton, the devoted husband and seasoned barrister, remained steadfastly at her side throughout the ordeal. His own statement was deliberate, his words weighed with a lawyer's precision. "Inspector," he said firmly, "my wife's reaction to Mr. Bristow's behavior was that of any reasonable person. The man's intrusion was improper and ill-timed. To stretch that into an accusation of violence is, frankly, an astonishing leap." His defense was eloquent, yet behind his composure flickered the unmistakable worry of a man aware that innocence alone does not always shield one from suspicion. Inspector Meadows, however, seemed increasingly convinced of Helena's involvement. I overheard him confiding to Sir James later that morning. "The facts, as I see them, point to the young lady. Motive and opportunity, both present. Bristow's knowledge of her family's affairs caused visible distress, and his death occurred within hours of their dispute." The words, though uttered with professional detachment, sent a chill through me. Meanwhile, Poirot had taken an entirely different course. While the inspector pursued the obvious suspect, my brilliant friend busied himself with quiet, deliberate observation. When I found him in the library, he was not studying the chair where Bristow had died, but instead crouched near the tall windows, examining the polished floorboards with a small magnifying glass. "You observe something of interest, Poirot?" I asked, trying to interpret his fascination with what appeared to be mere scuff marks. "Ah, mon ami," he replied, smiling faintly. "It is never the grand things that speak the loudest. It is the small, how do you say, imperfections. A smear upon the floor, a mark upon a boot. These they whisper truth." He turned to me suddenly. "Tell me, Hastings, when you and the others returned from the hunt that morning, what was your condition?" "Exhausted and soaked to the bone," I answered. "The rain caught us unawares. We were all spattered with mud." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Precisely. Mud. It clings to shoes, to carpets. It travels where men do not intend. You see, perhaps, how the weather, so inconvenient for your galloping, might yet prove most convenient for me." Though I could not follow his reasoning then, I sensed that the great detective had already seized upon a detail overlooked by all others. Meanwhile, the rest of the household lived in a state of strained civility. Gerald Fenton, the best man, did his best to maintain good humor, but beneath his polite exterior, I noted unease. Bristow, he confided to me one afternoon, was the sort of fellow who delighted in making others uncomfortable, always implying he knew more than he should. Frankly, I wish he'd never set foot at Wisteria House. There was truth in his words, but also hesitation, as though he held back something not meant for public ears. By the third day, Wisteria House had become less a home than a crucible. Every conversation felt weighted, every glance measured. What had begun as a union of joy now teetered under the strain of suspicion, loyalty, and fear. Helena remained under an unspoken cloud. Richard's confidence hardened into quiet defiance, and Inspector Meadows continued to pursue his tidy conclusion. Yet in the corner of that great house, Hercule Poirot polished his silver moustache and smiled to himself, a sure sign that the mystery, however tangled, was beginning to unravel in his mind. Chapter 7. The Little Grey Cells at Work. The atmosphere within Wisteria House had grown dense with unease, as though the very walls were whispering of secrets too dangerous to speak aloud. What had begun as a celebration had now curdled into an affair of shadows and speculation. Every glance carried meaning, every silence seemed deliberate. For my part, I could not help but feel that beneath the surface of these genteel surroundings, something far more intricate and sinister was at play. Hercule Poirot, as ever, moved through this tension with the composure of a man who saw beyond mere appearances. While Inspector Meadows busied himself with statements, motives, and visible facts, Poirot's little grey cells were occupied with something altogether different: the psychology of those involved. He was less interested in what people said than how they said it, and what their gestures betrayed in moments they thought unobserved. On the third morning after Arthur Bristow's untimely death, I found Poirot in the library, his sharp eyes roving over every inch of the room. The morning light filtered through the tall windows, illuminating the quiet orderliness of the scene. Yet Poirot's gaze was fixed not upon the grand furniture or the bookshelves, but upon a small, faint mark on the polished floor near the reading table. "Ah, Hastings, my friend," he murmured, crouching low. "Come closer. Tell me, what do you observe here?" Obediently, I stepped forward, peering down at the spot he indicated. At first, I saw nothing more than an ordinary patch of well-kept flooring. "I'm afraid I see nothing remarkable, Poirot," I confessed. "The usual signs of wear one might expect in an old English library." Poirot smiled faintly, his eyes glinting with that familiar spark. "Regardez bien, mon ami. Look more carefully. Just there, near the leg of the table. You perceive a faint discoloration, circular in shape?" Now that he mentioned it, I did. It was almost imperceptible. A faint ring, no larger than a few inches across, darker than the surrounding wood. "A stain of some kind," I ventured. "Perhaps water damage?" "Non, non, Hastings," he replied softly. "Not water. Observe the outline. It is uneven yet deliberate. A mark not of accident but of presence." As I bent closer, comprehension began to stir. "It looks rather like the imprint of a boot sole," I said slowly. "Just so," exclaimed Poirot, his expression triumphant. "A wet boot, pressed firmly against the wood and left there long enough to make its impression. Tell me, Hastings, when were the floors of this room last cleaned?" "Before the wedding, of course," I replied. "The servants were thorough." "Precisely. Which means," he continued, "that this mark could not have been made before that time. It must have been left afterward. Someone wearing wet boots entered this room after the preparations were complete." The implications struck me at once. "But the only people with wet boots that day would have been those returning from the hunt." Poirot nodded approvingly. "Exactement. The hunting party returned at 10:30. The ceremony began at 11:30. For such moisture to remain, the person must have come here almost immediately after their return. You see, Hastings, our mysterious visitor, came not by chance, but with purpose, and remained long enough to leave a mark." I frowned, struggling to piece it together. "But surely that proves nothing sinister. Perhaps someone simply sought shelter from the storm." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Ah, but consider, mon ami, the timing, the location, and the purpose. Why should anyone come here, to this very room, where later the body of Arthur Bristow was discovered? Why remain so still, unless occupied with something, shall we say, carefully deliberate?" As he spoke, I felt the first chill of true understanding. Poirot's deductions, always so meticulous, now formed the faint outline of something far more intricate than suicide or coincidence. He moved to the writing desk and delicately tapped a sheaf of papers. "And now, we consider the matter of handwriting. You examined the deceased's note yesterday, did you not?" "Yes. Meadows had an expert confirm it matched Bristow's hand," I replied, though the man did remark that the writing showed signs of distress. "Or imitation," murmured Poirot. "Suppose, Hastings, that the note was copied from genuine samples of Bristow's signature, perhaps from his own business documents. Such an act would require precision, privacy, and time." I began to see where he was leading. "So the person who came into the library, stood here, long enough to leave a wet boot print, might have been forging that note?" Poirot inclined his head gravely. "It is a possibility we cannot ignore. The floor mark tells us of presence, the handwriting tells us of deception, and together they suggest that what was presented as suicide may in fact have been something else entirely." As he spoke, the world outside the tall windows seemed to fade. The ticking of the clock, the quiet creak of the old house, all fell away before the weight of realization. Someone among us had engineered Bristow's death with calculated precision. The evidence was not in the grand gestures or dramatic scenes, but in a faint mark upon the floor, and the steady reasoning of Poirot's incomparable little grey cells. And so, as the mystery deepened, suspicion no longer fell upon one person alone, but upon every soul within Wisteria House. For in that place of celebration turned sorrow, it was clear that the truth, like the mark on the floor, lay just beneath the surface, faint but indelible. Chapter 8. The Revelation. The final act of our strange and sorrowful affair at Wisteria House unfolded with an air of solemn inevitability. The once festive mansion now felt more like a courtroom than a country estate, its grand halls echoing with the weight of unspoken truths. I had witnessed moments of revelation before, on the battlefield and in drawing rooms alike, but nothing had prepared me for the intellectual theatre Hercule Poirot was about to stage. At his request, Inspector Meadows agreed, somewhat grudgingly, to assemble every person connected with the case in the very room where Arthur Bristow had met his untimely end. The library, with its dark wood paneling and soft lamplight, became the stage for what would prove to be Poirot's most astonishing display of logic and psychological mastery. Helena and Richard Thornton sat together by the fireplace, their faces pale but composed, their unity as husband and wife unbroken even under suspicion. Sir James and Lady Mallory maintained their quiet dignity, while Gerald Fenton, once the life of the wedding celebration, appeared unusually withdrawn. Inspector Meadows occupied the desk, pen poised, ready to record whatever extraordinary truths might emerge. Poirot began in his characteristically calm yet commanding manner. "Mesdames et messieurs," he announced, "we are gathered here to bring light to a tragedy that turned joy into despair and love into accusation. The death of Mr. Arthur Bristow was presented as a case of self-destruction. But, and here his tone sharpened, appearances, as we know, can be most deceiving." A murmur swept through the room. Poirot continued, pacing gently before the assembled guests. "From the first, the evidence spoke too neatly. A revolver, a note, and a man with motives enough to die. But logic, mes amis, does not rest on appearances. The weapon's position, the peculiar phrasing of the suicide letter, and, most importantly, the temperament of the victim, none aligned with the theory of self-inflicted death." Inspector Meadows cleared his throat, unable to remain silent. "Mr. Poirot, with all respect, The simplest explanation remains that Mrs. Thornton acted out of fear of what the deceased knew about her family's affairs. Poirot turned sharply, his eyes gleaming. "Ah, Inspector, you are a man of facts, but not of psychology. You see only the surface. I, however, see beneath it." The connection between Mrs. Thornton and Mr. Bristow was not one of current guilt, but of past entanglement. Her late uncle's estate may have been linked to Bristow years ago, but that was not the cause of murder. Helena's hands trembled slightly in her lap, while Richard's reassuring touch steadied her. Poirot allowed a moment's silence to stretch before continuing in a low, deliberate tone. "The true motive lies in business, modern, immediate, and dangerous. Arthur Bristow had uncovered a pattern of embezzlement within his import company, fraudulent transactions tied to South American trade. Someone close to him had been siphoning funds to pay off gambling debts, and when Bristow threatened exposure..." His gaze fell upon Gerald Fenton. The color drained from Fenton's face. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Poirot's voice remained calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. "Yes, Mr. Fenton. You, who stood as best man at your friend's wedding, were also the man who stood most to lose should Bristow speak. Your debts, your desperation, your access, all pointed to one conclusion." The room had gone utterly still. Poirot continued with quiet precision, each word cutting through the air like a scalpel. "On the morning of the hunt, you arranged a private meeting with Bristow. You preserved your damp riding boots after returning, concealing them in the tack room so they would remain wet. Then, between the ceremony and the reception, you came here, under the pretense of conversation. The two men quarreled, and when Bristow refused your offer of silence, you shot him." Gerald rose abruptly, his face ashen. "That's a lie. I had no reason, no chance." "Mais non," Poirot interrupted softly. "You had every reason and ample chance. You then forged a suicide note using samples of Bristow's handwriting, taken from his business correspondence. You placed your own revolver beside the body, your wartime weapon, chosen deliberately because its familiarity would deflect suspicion. And you made certain the murder would remain undiscovered until you could return to the festivities and present yourself among the guests, the very image of innocent normalcy." Inspector Meadows's pencil froze mid-sentence. Every detail fit with mechanical precision, the kind of logic that could not be denied. The evidence Poirot had painstakingly gathered now stood irrefutable. The wet boot print in the library, the forged note, the financial discrepancies in the business records, and the psychological profile of a man driven to desperation. Fenton's denial collapsed beneath the weight of truth. His shoulders slumped, his voice breaking as he murmured, "Yes, yes, I did it. God help me. I thought I could fix it before anyone knew." As he was led away by the inspector, the oppressive tension that had haunted Wisteria House finally began to lift. Helena's name was cleared, her composure giving way to quiet tears of relief. Richard's hand found hers, their ordeal finally at an end. Poirot, meanwhile, remained calm as ever, his moustache immaculate, his eyes thoughtful. "You see, Hastings," he said at last, "it is always the psychology that reveals the truth. The human heart, it leaves marks just as surely as the wet boot upon the floor." As the last echoes of the evening faded, I found myself reflecting once more on my friend's extraordinary gift. Through sheer observation and the relentless application of reason, he had turned confusion into clarity, suspicion into justice. The great Hercule Poirot had once again proved that crime may deceive the eyes, but never the little grey cells. Epilogue. 3 days after Gerald Fenton's arrest, the train carried us away from the rolling hills and quaint cottages of Hampshire, the countryside slipping past in a haze of green that seemed almost to mock the darkness we had left behind. As the rhythmic clatter of wheels accompanied my thoughts, I reflected on how a celebration meant to herald love, and new beginnings had been transformed into a stage for human frailty and deception. Poirot sat across from me, impeccable as ever, his green eyes fixed on the passing landscape with that intense, all-encompassing focus he applied to every observation. Beneath his theatrical flair and meticulous grooming lay a sincere empathy for human suffering, a trait made all the more evident by the depth of his concern at Wisteria House. Betrayal, even when uncovered through logic, caused him visible unease. "It is curious, Hastings," he remarked, breaking the contemplative silence, "how tragedy so often germinates from virtues themselves. Loyalty, friendship, the wish to protect those we care for, these noble qualities, when twisted by circumstance or weakness, can become instruments of ruin. Consider Gerald Fenton, a man whose admirable loyalty and desire to remain a trusted friend led him into ruin." I nodded in quiet agreement. Gerald's penchant for gambling, once a harmless distraction in his Oxford days, had, combined with access to business funds and his desire to maintain his reputation as Richard's confidant, spiraled into a web of lies and deception from which there was no clean escape. Even the smallest detail, his deliberate decision to keep his riding boots damp, had been a clue to the extent of his premeditation, an almost imperceptible testament to the calculated mind of a desperate man. Helena and Richard had left Wisteria House the following morning, their honeymoon postponed, but their bond strengthened by the ordeal. Helena's relief was palpable, yet in her eyes lingered a sorrow for the friend whose weakness had nearly ruined her joy. Gerald's crime, born not of malice but of desperation, weighed upon her generous heart. "And what of the Mallory family?" I asked. "Will they recover from this scandal?" Poirot allowed a faint smile. "Ah, the English upper classes possess remarkable resilience. Sir James has begun the careful restoration of his family's reputation through charitable efforts and discreet acts of goodwill. Lady Mallory's incomparable skill as a hostess ensures that Wisteria House will continue to welcome distinguished guests, unmarred by past events. Time would render this tragedy merely another chapter in the estate's long history." As London's outskirts emerged through the carriage windows, I felt the comfort of familiar surroundings, though the memory of purple wisteria cascading across the gardens and the solemn elegance of the library lingered, reminding me of where trust had been betrayed and justice ultimately served. "The little grey cells, Hastings," Poirot observed, noting my reflective silence. "They do more than solve mysteries, they illuminate the human heart. In this case, they revealed that the gravest crimes often spring not from inherent evil, but from the inability to confront one's own flaws with honesty and courage." The train hissed to a stop at Victoria Station, its brakes grinding against the rails as the hustle and anonymity of London life greeted us. Gathering our belongings, I felt the familiar mixture of relief and contemplation. Wisteria House had once again demonstrated that beneath the surface of civility, human nature remained complex, unpredictable, and endlessly fascinating. A truth that would continue to provide Hercule Poirot with ample mysteries to unravel. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Wisteria House. We hope this tale of secrets, suspicion, and human frailty kept you guessing until the very end. If you enjoyed unraveling this mystery, remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more classic detective adventures. Until the next enigma unfolds, this is Alfie, signing off. Here's a complete, analytical, chapter-by-chapter breakdown of The Mystery at Wisteria House. Chapter 1. The wedding invitation. The story opens in London with a seemingly ordinary invitation that sets in motion one of Poirot's most delicate cases. Captain Hastings receives word of Helena Mallory's wedding to Richard Thornton, a union surrounded by elegance but shadowed by subtle unease. Poirot, intrigued by Hastings' description of the Mallorys, treats the card not as stationery but as a clue, analyzing its texture, handwriting, and implication. Beneath the promise of celebration lies a sense that not all unions are built on harmony. The tone is deceptively light, a calm surface concealing something sinister beneath. What we learn: this chapter establishes the tension between appearances and hidden motives. Poirot's early suspicion reminds us that the most joyous occasions often conceal the darkest truths. Moral theme: beauty and refinement can disguise unrest. Truth often begins where comfort ends. Viewer. Question: have you ever sensed something unsettling beneath a moment that seemed perfect? Chapter 2. Arrivals and First Impressions. Hastings and Poirot arrive at Wisteria House, a vision of Georgian grace draped in violet blossoms. The Mallorys welcome them with polished civility, Sir James, commanding and proud, Lady Mallory, the silent pillar of order, and Helena, poised yet visibly strained. Richard Thornton, the groom, is every inch the modern gentleman, but Poirot catches a fleeting unease behind his composure. The atmosphere of charm and luxury carries a subtle dissonance, every smile rehearsed, every glance weighted with meaning. Poirot's remark that, where there is perfection, there is anxiety, crystallizes the tension beneath the beauty. What we learn: this chapter introduces the classic contrast between external elegance and moral decay. The estate itself becomes a living metaphor for secrets disguised as heritage. Moral theme: polished surfaces can hide the fractures of truth. Order often masks the fear of exposure. Viewer question: do you believe true harmony exists, or is it always maintained by quiet pretense? Chapter 3. The Unwelcome Guest. The serene facade cracks with the arrival of Arthur Bristow, an uninvited guest whose presence sends ripples through the household. Helena's composure falters, Richard's confidence hardens, and Gerald Fenton, the groom's friend, visibly panics. Bristow's remarks about mutual interests and unsettled arrangements expose a buried history between him, Richard, and Fenton. His intrusion transforms the wedding gathering into a stage of veiled accusations and quiet dread. Poirot observes, noting how fear manifests not in words but in glances. The peace of Wisteria House is irreversibly disturbed. What we learn: the past has a way of arriving uninvited, often at the very moment one believes it forgotten. Moral theme: secrets demand acknowledgement. When buried, they return as ghosts of guilt. Viewer. Question: if someone from your past resurfaced with dangerous knowledge, how far would you go to keep it hidden? Chapter 4. The Wedding Day. Sunlight and ceremony offer a deceptive calm as Helena and Richard's wedding unfolds. Beneath the charm and splendor, subtle cracks remain. Poirot declines to join the morning hunt, preferring to chase human motives, a decision that proves wise. Among the riders, Bristow's awkward presence draws silent resentment. Later, the ceremony itself is flawless, Helena radiant, Richard noble, and the guests enchanted. Yet even amidst the applause, tension lingers like a faint discord in a perfect melody. Poirot's gaze catches those uneasy smiles that rarely appear in moments of innocence. What we learn: joy built on suppression cannot last. Truth, once denied, waits patiently to re-emerge. Moral theme: celebration cannot cleanse deceit, it only delays its reckoning. Viewer. Question: Do you think happiness founded on secrets can ever truly endure? Chapter 5. Death in the Library. The day of laughter turns abruptly to horror when Arthur Bristow is found dead in the library, a revolver at his side, a suicide note neatly placed. Inspector Meadows quickly declares it self-inflicted, the letter citing despair and debt. Yet Poirot's mind detects dissonance in the details, the handwriting too perfect, the positioning too tidy. The supposedly despairing man left behind a note composed with professional calm. Helena's shaken reaction and Richard's controlled demeanor add to the mystery. Poirot's quiet observation, "There is art here, not despair," signals the turn from tragedy to investigation. What we learn, in the structure of deceit, perfection often reveals guilt more than innocence. Moral theme. Despair speaks in chaos, but pretense writes in careful lines. Viewer. Question: would you trust what appears logical, or the quiet instinct that tells you something is wrong? Chapter 6. Under Suspicion. Suspicion thickens like fog over Wisteria House. Inspector Meadows focuses narrowly on Helena, citing her earlier quarrel with Bristow and potential motive tied to family finances. Helena bears the interrogation with restrained grace, her poise crumbling only in fleeting moments. Poirot, meanwhile, investigates in silence, searching for the truth that lies beyond words. A muddy bootprint by the library window catches his eye, an anomaly that will soon become crucial. He begins connecting the storm, the hunt, and the timing of events, while others see only coincidence. What we learn: guilt may hide in shadows, but truth often reveals itself through the smallest of traces. Moral theme. Justice requires patience. Haste is the enemy of understanding. Viewer. Question: would you rather be quickly judged or painstakingly understood? Chapter 7. The Little Grey Cells at Work. Poirot's reasoning begins to crystallize. The faint mark on the library floor, a damp bootprint left after the hunt, proves that someone entered the room between the ceremony and reception. The suicide note, too neat to be authentic, points to forgery. Slowly, the picture emerges of a calculated crime staged to mimic despair. Poirot sees through misdirection. This was not a tragedy of emotion, but of design. The quiet revelation shifts suspicion from Helena to Gerald Fenton, whose nervous attempts at cheer now appear as concealment. What we learn: truth hides not in drama, but in detail. The smallest clue can expose the grandest deceit. Moral theme. Every deception carries its own flaw, the human touch that betrays perfection. Viewer. Question: do you believe mistakes are what make guilt visible, or what make humanity real? Chapter 8. The Revelation. Poirot assembles all at Wisteria House for his final exposition, a courtroom within four walls. In a masterful display of logic, he reconstructs the crime. Bristow had uncovered Gerald Fenton's financial fraud, and in desperation, Fenton silenced him, staging the act as suicide. His plan was meticulous: forged handwriting, careful placement, and the illusion of despair. Yet the one thing he could not erase, the wet bootprint, betrayed him. Poirot's calm unraveling of motive, opportunity, and psychology leaves no room for doubt. Fenton's confession arrives not as rage, but as surrender. What we learn: the mind, not the weapon, commits the crime. Intellect used without conscience turns brilliance into ruin. Moral theme. Desperation disguises itself as reason until truth strips it bare. Viewer question: can intelligence alone protect one from moral collapse, or does conscience remain the true safeguard? In The Mystery at Wisteria House, Each character plays a precise and revealing role in a story where appearances, loyalties, and motives intertwine beneath the veneer of elegance. Hercule Poirot anchors the narrative as the voice of reason and insight, unraveling deception through observation and logic rather than haste or sentiment. Captain Hastings serves as both witness and moral compass, providing the emotional grounding to Poirot's intellect and allowing the reader to experience fear, doubt, and revelation through his eyes. Helena Mallory stands at the story's emotional center, a poised yet conflicted woman whose quiet strength conceals the torment of secrets not her own. Richard Thornton, her husband-to-be, represents ambition and propriety, a man torn between love and reputation, whose restraint becomes both his protection and his flaw. Gerald Fenton embodies duplicity masked by charm, his facade of friendship concealing the desperation of guilt that drives him toward destruction. Arthur Bristow enters as the unexpected disruptor, the truth-bearer whose arrival ignites the chain of events leading to tragedy. His death becomes the key that unlocks the moral heart of the mystery. Sir James and Lady Mallory reflect the older world's obsession with lineage and control, their household's refinement built upon repression. Inspector Meadows represents institutional order, competent but unimaginative, contrasting with Poirot's psychological depth. Together, this ensemble transforms Wisteria House into a living theater of deceit and consequence, where every smile hides intention and every gesture reveals a trace of truth waiting to be seen. At its heart, the mystery at Wisteria House is a reflection on how the finest appearances can conceal the darkest intentions. Beneath the charm of English gentility lies a web of greed, guilt, and moral decay, proof that refinement offers no immunity from corruption. Through Poirot's calm intelligence, we are reminded that truth often whispers rather than shouts, and that justice is found not in vengeance, but in understanding motive. The story leaves us with a haunting realization. Even in a house draped in beauty, the smallest fracture can expose everything that lies beneath. In the end, Wisteria House stands not as a monument to tragedy, but as a warning. Deceit, no matter how elegantly crafted, always unravels in the light of truth. If you enjoyed this exploration of mystery and morality, don't forget to subscribe for more deep dive analyses of timeless detective tales and share your thoughts below, because every mystery becomes richer when questioned together.